My mother thought she could move into my penthouse, drink my vintage wine, and kick me out of my own life. She called it family obligation. I called it a parasite infection. When I handed her the itemized bill for $15,000 across the dinner table, her jaw hit the floor. But that was just the beginning. Before I tell you how I legally evicted my entire toxic family in one night, please like this video and subscribe if you have ever had to buy your own freedom. My name is Simone Vance. At 35 years old, I have calculated the probability of failure for Fortune 500 companies and predicted market crashes that blindsided Wall Street. As a senior risk analyst, my entire career is built on seeing the red flags that others ignore. I live by data. I live by logic. I live by the hard truth that numbers do not lie, but people do, especially the people who share your DNA. I built my life in Chicago to be a fortress, a steel and glass sanctuary far away from the humidity of Atlanta and the suffocating expectations of my mother Beatrice. But even the best fortress has a weakness. Mine was a cousin with an iPhone and a lack of discretion. It was 2 in the morning and the city was finally asleep. I was not. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass of my 45th floor apartment, looking out at the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The water was black and calm, reflecting the city lights like a mirror. This silence cost me $1.5 million. It was worth every single cent. I swirled the Malbec in my glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. There was no screaming here, no guilt trips, no passive-aggressive comments about my hair or my career or my lack of a husband. Just the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the wind pressing against the glass. I had curated a life that was sterile and safe. I told myself I was happy. I told myself that being alone was the price of success. I sat down on the kitchen island and opened my laptop. My bank accounts were healthy. My credit score was perfect. I was safe. Or so I thought. The phone buzzed on the marble counter, a single short vibration that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I should have ignored it. It was late. Nothing good happens after midnight. But habit is a dangerous thing. I picked it up. It was an Instagram notification. My younger cousin Jasmine. Sweet, naive Jasmine who did not understand that secrets kept us safe. She had posted a photo. I froze as I looked at the screen. It was a picture of my building view she had found on a real estate blog, where I was recently featured as a top executive under 40. The caption read, "So proud of my big cousin Simone, owning the sky in Chicago Black Excellence Family Goals." My stomach dropped. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Jasmine had just handed a map to the enemy. I tried to report the photo. I tried to message her to take it down, but I was too late. The digital breadcrumb trail had been found. 5 minutes later, the second vibration came. It was not a notification. It was a text message. From a number I had blocked a dozen times, a number that I still knew by heart. My mother, Beatrice. The message was not a hello. It was not a "how are you?" It was not a mother checking on her child after 2 years of silence. It was a demand. The preview on my lock screen made my hands shake. "You need to sell that place. Chantel and Kyle need $15,000 for a startup and they need housing. You are the older sister. Do your duty. Stop hiding from God and your family." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive. Chantel, my younger sister, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, the one who got the ballet lessons while I got a job at 16 to pay the electric bill. And Kyle, her husband, a man who thought cryptocurrency was a personality trait and refused to work for anyone because he was an entrepreneur. They wanted my sanctuary. They wanted to liquidate my hard work to fund another one of their failed schemes. I felt the old panic rising. The feeling of being small, the feeling of being an ATM machine with a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was not that little girl in Atlanta anymore. I was Simone Vance. I owned this city. I typed a single word. No. Then I blocked the number again. I finished my wine in one gulp and turned off the lights. I told myself that was the end of it. I told myself they were 1,000 miles away. I was wrong. I had underestimated their desperation, and I had underestimated how far Beatrice would go to enable her favorite child. 3 days passed. The anxiety had started to fade. I convinced myself the text was just a blip, a momentary lapse in my firewall. I was in the middle of a video conference with a client in Tokyo. I was wearing my best blazer, my hair pulled back in a sleek bun projecting the image of absolute control. We were discussing a multi-million-dollar hedge fund strategy. Then the intercom shrieked. It was not the soft chime of a delivery. It was the urgent, continuous buzzing of the front desk. I muted my microphone and pressed the talk button. "Yes, Marcus, what is it?" "The concierge?" Marcus sounded frantic. He was a polite young man who was used to dealing with doctors and lawyers, not drama. "Ms. Vance, I am so sorry to disturb you, but there are people here. They claim to be your family. They are causing a scene in the lobby." My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I looked at the security feed on my iPad. The color drained from my face. There they were. My mother Beatrice wearing her oversized Sunday church hat like a helmet of righteousness. She was clutching her purse with both hands, her face twisted in that familiar mask of tragic suffering she used whenever she wanted something. Next to her was Chantel. My sister looked around the marble lobby with hungry eyes. She was wearing a tight dress that accentuated her stomach, and she was filming everything with her phone. And then there was Kyle. He was arguing with the security guard, pointing a finger in the man's face. I counted the luggage. 1, 2, 3, 6. 6 large suitcases. They were not visiting. They were moving in. I saw my mother fake a fainting spell near the elevator banks. She grabbed her chest and leaned heavily against a potted plant. I saw my neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Henderson stopping to stare. The Hendersons were on the HOA board. They were the ones who made sure no one left trash in the hallway. This was the nightmare scenario. Public humiliation. My sanctuary was being breached. Marcus' voice came over the intercom again. "Miss Vance, the gentleman is threatening to sue us for discrimination if we do not let them up. He says his wife is pregnant and needs to sit down." Pregnant. The word hung in the air. So that was the angle. That was the weapon they were going to use. I looked at Chantel on the screen. She did look different. Or maybe she just looked well-fed. It did not matter. If I left them down there, Beatrice would scream until the police came. She would make sure everyone in this building knew that the successful Simone Vance was leaving her poor elderly mother and pregnant sister on the street. It would ruin my reputation. In my line of work, reputation was currency. I apologized to my client in Tokyo lying about a building emergency and ended the call. I stood up and smoothed my blazer. My hands were trembling, but my mind was sharpening. It was the same feeling I got before a high-stakes negotiation. I assessed the risk. The risk of leaving them downstairs was total social destruction. The risk of letting them up was a loss of peace. I chose the lesser evil, or at least what I thought was the lesser evil. "Send them up, Marcus." I walked to the door and unlocked it. I did not realize it then, but I was unlocking the door to a war zone. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm. I looked rich. I looked unbothered. I would need every ounce of that armor. The elevator dinged down the hall. I heard Beatrice's voice before I saw her. "I cannot believe she makes us wait. After all I sacrificed for her." Ungrateful. That is what she is. The heavy footsteps stopped in front of my door. I swung it open. Beatrice stood there. She did not say hello. She did not hug me. She pushed past me into the foyer, dragging a suitcase that looked like it had survived a war. "Praise Jesus, we are out of that drafty lobby," she announced, dropping the bag on my hardwood floors. The wheels left a streak of dirt. Chantel followed, waddling slightly. She stopped and looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on my silk blouse. "You changed your hair," she said. "It looks expensive." Kyle brought up the rear. He was sweating and out of breath, but he still managed to look at me with that smirk I hated. That smirk that said he knew something I didn't. "Hey Simone, nice place. A bit small for the price though, right? I bet the HOA fees are a scam." I stood there holding the door open. My family. The people who shared my DNA. The people who had forgotten I existed for 2 years until they needed a paycheck. They were inside. And as I watched Kyle kick off his shoes and walk toward my pristine white living room rug without asking, I realized my mistake. I had let the vampires in, and they were thirsty. Kyle dropped the last suitcase and wiped his forehead. "So where do we sleep?" "The master bedroom is best for Chantel since she is expecting. You can take the couch, right?" I looked at him. I looked at my mother, who was already opening my mail on the console table. I looked at Chantel, who was touching the screen of my smart thermostat. "Number 1, I said. The room went silent. Beatrice turned around slowly, holding an envelope with my bank logo on it. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I remembered from childhood. I said no. "You are not taking my room. You are not staying. You have 24 hours. One night." "That is it," Kyle laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Come on, Simone. Do not be like that. We are family. And family helps each other. Besides." He looked around the apartment again, his eyes calculating the value of everything from the lamp to the view. "We have a business proposition for you. We are going to make you richer than you already are." I looked at the dirt on my floor. I looked at the greed in their eyes. I knew then that 24 hours was going to feel like 24 years. But I also knew something they did not. I was a risk analyst, and I had just identified 3 liabilities that needed to be liquidated. "Make yourself comfortable," I said, my voice ice cold. "Enjoy the view. It is the only thing you are going to get for free." The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into hell. Each floor number lighting up on the panel was a countdown to a confrontation I had spent 2 years avoiding. The stainless steel doors reflected my face back to me. I looked composed. I looked expensive. But beneath the layers of silk and professional detachment, my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew my mother. I knew Beatrice Vance. She did not travel all the way from Atlanta to Chicago just to say hello. She came for a performance and she needed an audience. As the doors slid open, the cool air of the lobby hit me, but it was instantly overpowered by the heavy, cloying scent of gardenias. My mother's perfume. It smelled like Sunday mornings at church, and the suffocating weight of expectations. I stepped out onto the marble floor, my heels clicking sharply, echoing in the cavernous space. The concierge Marcus looked at me with eyes wide with panic. He was standing behind the mahogany desk, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. And there they were. Beatrice saw me first. The moment our eyes locked, her posture changed. She went from a woman arguing with a security guard to a martyr collapsing under the weight of her cross. She let out a wail that was designed to pierce through walls and shatter composure. "Simone, my baby," she screamed. She lunged at me. I tried to sidestep, but she was faster, fueled by the adrenaline of her own drama. She wrapped her arms around me, pinning my arms to my sides. It was not a hug. It was a tackle. She buried her face in my shoulder and sobbed loudly, her body shaking with exaggerated tremors. "Praise God you are here," she cried loud enough for the residents waiting by the mailboxes to hear. "Look at you. So high and mighty while your own flesh and blood is out on the street. How can you sleep at night, Simone? How can you live in this palace while your sister is carrying a child with nowhere to lay her head?" I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron. I looked over her shoulder at Chantel. My sister was leaning against a marble pillar, posing like a tragic heroine in a soap opera. She had one hand resting protectively over her stomach, which looked slightly rounded under her tight dress. I knew for a fact Chantel had gained weight from eating fast food, but right now in this lighting she was selling the narrative of the destitute pregnant mother perfectly. She caught my eye and sniffed, wiping a dry tear from her cheek. "Simone, please," Chantel said, her voice trembling just the right amount. "We do not want to cause trouble. We just need a place to rest. The baby has been kicking all day and I feel so faint." The performance was masterful. I saw Mrs. Vander Woodson, the head of the Homeowners Association, peering over the top of her designer glasses. She was whispering to her husband. I could read her lips. Disgraceful. This was exactly what Beatrice wanted. She was weaponizing my success against me, turning my neighbors into a jury, and me into the defendant. "Mother, stop it," I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. "Let go of me. You are making a scene." Beatrice pulled back, but she kept her hands on my shoulders, trapping me. "A scene," she shrieked. "You care about a scene when your family is suffering. You have turned your back on God, Simone. You have turned your back on the people who raised you. Is this what money does to people? Does it turn their hearts to stone?" She turned to face the small crowd that had gathered, spreading her arms wide. "Look at my daughter, everyone. She lives in the sky, but she leaves her mother in the gutter." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from pure, unadulterated rage. This was the same tactic she used when I wanted to go to college instead of working at the family grocery store. Public guilt, public shame. But before I could speak, before I could eviscerate her with the truth, Kyle stepped forward. Kyle, my brother-in-law, the man who thought wearing a blazer over a t-shirt made him a CEO. He walked towards me with a swagger that was entirely unearned. He positioned himself between me and the concierge Marcus, effectively blocking my exit. He looked at Marcus, then at me, and then he puffed out his chest. "Leave her alone, Beatrice," Kyle said, his voice booming with false authority. "Simone clearly has forgotten where she came from." He turned to Marcus, pointing a finger in the young man's face. "And you should be ashamed of yourself, trying to kick out a pregnant woman. Is that the policy in this building? Or is it just because we do not look like the typical residents here?" I blinked. The audacity was staggering. Kyle, a white man from the suburbs of Georgia, was standing in the lobby of a luxury Chicago apartment building, accusing a young black man of discrimination. It was so absurd I almost laughed, but the look in Kyle's eyes stopped me. It was cold. It was calculating. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was throwing around buzzwords like racism and discrimination because he knew they were radioactive. He knew that if he made enough noise, management would do anything to make him stop. Marcus looked terrified. "Sir, I never said that. I just said guests need to be announced." Kyle cut him off. "Do not interrupt me. I know my rights. This is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. I could have your job for this. I could sue this entire building for emotional distress caused to my wife. Do you know how stress affects a fetus? Do you want to be responsible for a miscarriage?" He turned to me, his face twisting into a mask of disappointment. "And you, Simone, standing there letting this hired help disrespect your family. I thought you had more class than that. I thought you were a leader. But I guess you are just a follower of these elitist rules." Kyle stepped into my personal space. I could smell stale cigarette smoke and cheap mints on his breath. He lowered his voice so only I could hear, but the menace was clear. "You are going to let us up, Simone, or I'm going to make sure every news outlet in Chicago knows that the big-shot risk analyst hates her own family. I will livestream this right now. I have 5,000 followers. Do you want your boss to see that?" I looked at him. I looked at the phone in his hand, his thumb hovering over the record button. He was not protecting his wife. He was not defending his mother-in-law. He was securing a heavy bag. He was leveraging my fear of scandal to get a key to the penthouse. I looked around the lobby. Mrs. Vander Woodson was now recording on her phone too, probably to send to the board as evidence for a noise complaint violation. People were stopping on the sidewalk outside, looking through the glass doors. The situation was spiraling. If the police came, Beatrice would throw herself on the floor. Kyle would scream police brutality. It would be a circus. And my name, my hard-earned professional reputation, would be the main attraction. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I had to make a choice. A fast choice. I could stand my ground and watch my career burn, or I could swallow my pride and let the parasites in for a limited time. As a risk analyst, I knew that sometimes you have to accept a small loss to prevent a catastrophic one. Fine. I said the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Beatrice stopped crying instantly. Her face cleared as if by a miracle. What did you say, baby? I glared at her. I said fine, you can come up. But listen to me carefully. I stepped closer to Kyle, forcing him to take a step back. I looked him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of executive power I possessed. One night. You have 24 hours. That is it. Tomorrow morning you are out. I do not care if Chantel is in labor. I do not care if it is snowing. One night. Kyle smirked. It was a slow, greasy smile that made my skin crawl. He tapped Marcus on the shoulder. See that, buddy? She saw reason. You should learn from her. He gestured to Beatrice and Chantel, like a ringmaster presenting his show. Come on, ladies. Let us go see this view Simone is hoarding. Beatrice gathered her bags, her miraculous recovery complete. She waved at Mrs. van der Woodsen as if they were old friends. God bless you, ma'am. Family is everything, isn't it? They marched towards the elevators, leaving me standing in the lobby with Marcus. I looked at the young concierge. His hands were shaking slightly. I am sorry, Marcus, I said softly. He just nodded, too stunned to speak. I turned and followed them. As the elevator doors closed, shutting us in together, the air instantly became thick with their triumph. Kyle leaned against the back wall, his eyes scanning the buttons. Penthouse, huh? He said, whistling low. Must be nice. I did not answer. I watched the numbers climb. 20, 30, 40. With every floor I felt the sanctuary I had built slipping away. But as I looked at Kyle's reflection in the door, seeing the greed radiating off him, I realized something. He thought he had won. He thought he had bullied me into submission. He did not know that he had just trapped himself in a cage with a lioness. I was not the victim here. I was the one with the key card. I was the one with the cameras. And I was the one who was going to make sure that this 24-hour stay would be the most expensive night of their lives. The heavy oak door swung open silently, revealing the sanctuary I had spent 2 years curating. My penthouse was a study in minimalism, cool grays, stark whites, and accents of matte black. It was designed to be a place where my mind could rest, where the chaos of the financial markets could be filtered out by clean lines and empty space. But as my family stepped over the threshold, that carefully constructed peace was shattered instantly. They did not just enter my home. They invaded it. The sound of 6 cheap plastic suitcases rolling across my imported hardwood floors sounded like hail on a tin roof. It was a grating, aggressive noise that made my teeth ache. Chantel was the first to speak. She stopped in the middle of the foyer and looked around with a mixture of confusion and disdain. Her nose wrinkled as if she smelled something unpleasant. It is so gray in here, she said, her voice echoing in the high ceilings. It looks like a dentist office or a prison. Where is the color, Simone? Where is the life? She walked over to my console table and picked up a hand-sculpted clay vase from Japan. She did not hold it with care. She held it like she was weighing fruit at a grocery store. She tapped her long acrylic nails against the ceramic, making a sharp clicking sound. This looks like something I made in 3rd grade art class. She laughed, tossing it back onto the table with a careless thud. I bet you paid a fortune for this junk. You always were the type to get ripped off because you think expensive means good. Beatrice walked past her, dragging her luggage, which was leaving a trail of street grit on my floor. She did not look at the decor. She looked at the assets. I watched her eyes dart around the room, scanning for price tags. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and touched the heavy velvet drapes. She rubbed the fabric between her thumb and forefinger, testing the quality. Silk. She muttered to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. Heavy silk. Must be at least 300 a yard. She turned to me, her face rearranging itself into that mask of disappointed piety. Simone, baby, this place is huge. It is a palace. And to think you live here all alone with no husband and no children. It is sinful, really. Hoarding all this space while your sister is crammed into a one-bedroom apartment. She walked over to my abstract painting, a large black and white piece that I had commissioned from a local artist. She shook her head. And this? What is this supposed to be? It looks like a mess. You know, for the money you waste on this scribble-scrabble, you could have tithed to the church. You could have helped your family. But that is you, Simone, always putting money into things that do not love you back. I stood by the door watching them dissect my life. Every criticism was a little dig. Every touch felt like a violation. I wanted to scream at them to stop touching my things. I wanted to tell them that the vase cost more than their car, and the painting was worth more than their dignity. But I stayed silent. I closed the door and locked it. I was not just locking them in, I was locking myself in with them. While Beatrice and Chantel were busy criticizing my taste, Kyle had made himself at home in the one place I truly feared him entering. The kitchen. My kitchen was my pride and joy. Marble countertops, customized cabinets, and a wine collection that I had been building for 5 years. I heard the distinct sound of the refrigerator door sealing open. I walked quickly into the kitchen, my heels clicking on the tile. Kyle was standing there, bathed in the soft LED light of the open fridge. He was not looking for water. He was not looking for a snack. He was holding a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1998. It was one of the most prized bottles in my collection. A bottle I was saving for a promotion or a wedding or a day when I truly felt I had made it. Kyle held it up to the light, squinting at the label. "Fancy," he said. "French. I bet this is the good stuff." "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Put that back, Kyle. That is not for drinking. That is a collector item. It is worth $800. Kyle looked at me, and then he looked at the bottle. He smirked. That same greasy, entitled smirk from the elevator. $800 for fermented grape juice. He shook his head. "See, this is what is wrong with you, Simone. You put value on things instead of people. What is the point of having it if you do not enjoy it? You are so uptight. You need to loosen up." Before I could reach him, he grabbed the corkscrew that was lying on the counter. With a brutal, efficient motion, he jammed the screw into the cork. I watched in horror as he twisted it. The cork popped. It was a sound that usually brought me joy, but now it sounded like a bone breaking. "Kyle!" I warned, stepping forward. He ignored me. He reached into the cupboard and grabbed a glass. Not a wine glass, a regular water tumbler. He poured the dark red liquid into the glass, filling it to the brim, like it was fruit punch. He did not let it breathe. He did not appreciate the aroma. He took a massive gulp, swallowing it loud and hard. He smacked his lips. "It is okay, a little dry for my taste. I prefer something sweeter. But it will do." He leaned back against my pristine white counter, swirling the expensive wine in the cheap glass. "You know, Simone, real rich people are generous. They share their blessings. I am actually doing you a favor. I am teaching you how to be a host. If you want to be part of the elite, you have to stop acting like a miser. Generosity is the ultimate status symbol." I stared at him. My hands were balled into fists at my sides. He was drinking my investment. He was drinking my hard work. And he was lecturing me about generosity while he did it. I calculated the cost in my head. $800 plus tax plus appreciation value. I added it to the mental tab. "Enjoy it, Kyle," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Make sure you drink every drop. It is going to be the most expensive drink you ever had." He just laughed and poured himself another glass, splashing a few drops of red wine onto my white marble counter. He did not wipe it up. The invasion moved from the kitchen to the living room. The suitcases were piled in the center of the rug like a barricade. Beatrice was sitting in my favorite armchair, her shoes still on, resting her feet on the coffee table. Chantel was wandering down the hallway, looking into the rooms. "So where do we sleep?" Chantel asked, coming back into the living room. I saw the big bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the view of the lake. "That is yours, right?" "Yes," I said. "That is the master suite." "Great," Chantel clapped her hands. "Kyle, bring the bags. We will take that one." I blinked. "Excuse me." Chantel looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. "The master bedroom. We will take it. I mean, obviously. I am pregnant, Simone. I have back pain. I have swollen ankles. I need a proper mattress. I checked the one in there. It is a Tempur-Pedic, right? That is exactly what I need for my condition. You can sleep on the couch. It looks comfortable enough." Beatrice chimed in from the armchair. "It is only fair, Simone. Your sister is carrying a life. You are young and strong. You can sleep anywhere. When I was pregnant with you, I slept on a floor for a week. You should be happy to sacrifice for your nephew." The audacity was so pure it was almost blinding. They wanted to kick me out of my own bed in my own house. "No," I said. My voice was low, but it left no room for argument. Chantel's face fell. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. I am the owner of this house. I sleep in my bed. You are guests, uninvited guests. You sleep where I tell you to sleep." I pointed to the large gray sectional sofa in the living room. "That sofa pulls out into a queen bed. There are extra blankets in the closet. That is where you sleep. Beatrice, you can take the guest room down the hall, but no one sets foot in my bedroom. That door stays locked." Kyle walked out of the kitchen holding the half-empty bottle of wine. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "You really are heartless, aren't you? Making a pregnant woman sleep on a couch. I guess money really does not buy class." Chantel started to cry. It was a soft, practiced whimper. "My back hurts so much, Simone. I just wanted one night of good sleep. Why do you hate me? Why do you hate my baby?" I looked at them. The three of them united in their entitlement. They were trying to break me. They were trying to use guilt as a crowbar to pry me out of my own life. "The couch," I repeated, "or the lobby. Those are the options. Choose one." Chantel threw herself onto the sofa, sobbing loudly into the cushions. Beatrice glared at me, muttering something about the devil hardening my heart. Kyle just took another swig of my wine and stared at me with cold, dead eyes. "Fine," Kyle said. "We will take the couch, but do not expect us to be grateful. You are treating us like dogs." I turned around and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I went inside and closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my back against the wood, listening to the muffled sounds of them rearranging my living room. I heard the TV turn on. I heard them complaining. I was safe in my room, but I knew the truth. I was a prisoner in my own home. I looked at the bed they had tried to steal. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up a spreadsheet. Item 1. Chateau Margaux, 1998. $800. Item 2. Cleaning fee for red wine stains on marble, $200. Item 3. Hotel rate for penthouse suite occupancy, $500 a night. I started typing. If they wanted to treat my home like a hotel, I would treat them like customers. And customers have to pay. The invasion was supposed to be temporary, but 48 hours later, my apartment felt like occupied territory. I had left for work early that morning, desperate to escape the sound of Kyle snoring on my living room sofa and the smell of bacon grease that had seemingly permanently attached itself to my curtains. My office was my sanctuary, a place of order and spreadsheets, but a canceled afternoon meeting gave me a rare opportunity to go home early. I debated staying downtown, maybe getting a hotel room just to experience silence for a few hours, but the security cameras on my phone were offline. The feed had been black since noon. My risk analyst brain went into overdrive. A system failure was possible, but human interference was probable. I drove home with a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. When the elevator doors opened on the 45th floor, I did not need a key to know something was wrong. I could hear the bass. It was a heavy, thumping trap beat vibrating through the hallway walls. It was coming from my unit. I unlocked the front door and the sound hit me like a physical wave. The air conditioner was blasting, but the apartment smelled of burnt popcorn and cheap body spray. The living room was empty, but the mess was not. Pizza boxes were stacked on the coffee table, and dirty towels were strewn across the floor like fallen soldiers. But the music was not coming from the living room. It was coming from the master bedroom, my bedroom, the room I had explicitly locked and forbidden them from entering. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding not with fear but with a cold, sharp anger. The door to my suite was wide open. The lock had not been picked, it had been scratched and forced, likely with a butter knife or a screwdriver. I stepped into the doorway, and the sight that greeted me made my breath hitch in my throat. Chantel was standing in front of my floor-to-ceiling mirror. She had set up a ring light, which she must have dragged in from her suitcase, and her phone was propped up on a tripod facing her. She was not wearing her maternity clothes. She was wearing my dress. It was an emerald green silk slip dress custom-made for me in Italy 3 years ago. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I owned, not just because of the price tag, which was over $2,000, but because it represented the first time I felt truly beautiful and successful. It was delicate. It was precise. And now it was stretched dangerously tight over Chantel's body. The seams were straining against her hips, and the delicate fabric was bunching around her waist. She was dancing. Or at least she was attempting to sway seductively to the music while talking to her phone screen. "Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. She shouted over the music, throwing her hair back. "Just giving you a little tour of the new crib. Yeah, hubby finally closed the deal on the penthouse. You know how we do. Black excellence, baby. Look at this view. Look at this silk. This is what happens when you manifest your dreams." I stood there frozen for a moment, watching my sister rewrite reality. She was stealing my life. She was repackaging my hard work and selling it to strangers on the internet as her own. She spun around giggling, and that is when she saw me in the reflection of the mirror. She did not look guilty. She did not stop. She just winked at the camera. "Oh, look, everyone, it is the maid. Just kidding, it is my big sis coming to celebrate with me. Say hi, Simone." Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap like a branch breaking. It was a quiet, terrifying click, like a safety being switched off a weapon. I walked across the room. I did not run. I moved with purpose. "Get out of that dress," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the bass. Chantel laughed nervously, glancing at the phone. She was still live. "Chill out, Simone. I am just modeling it. I was going to promote your little job or whatever. Why are you being so stingy?" I reached for the phone on the tripod. I did not want her followers to see my face. I did not want to be part of this delusion. I said, "Take it off. Now. You broke into my room. You broke the lock." I grabbed the phone to end the stream. Chantel shrieked and lunged for it, trying to protect her audience from the truth. "No, stop it. You are ruining my engagement." She grabbed my wrist with one hand, and with the other she grabbed the strap of the silk dress to pull herself away. She pulled hard. Too hard. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of money burning. Rip! The delicate emerald silk tore from the neckline down to the waist. The fabric gave way under the strain of her grip and her size. Chantel stumbled back. She did not fall hard. She barely lost her balance, stumbling onto the plush carpet of my bedroom. It was a soft landing, a controlled landing, but the performance began instantly. Chantel grabbed her stomach and let out a scream that could have shattered glass. She curled into a ball on the floor, writhing as if she had been shot. My baby, you pushed me. Oh God, she pushed me. You killed my baby Simone." I stood there holding her phone, which was still recording. I looked at the torn dress hanging off her body like a rag. I looked at her face, twisted in fake agony. I knew she was acting. I knew she had not hit her stomach. But I also knew what was coming next. The thundering of footsteps. Beatrice and Kyle burst into the room, breathless and wide-eyed. They saw the scene that Chantel had perfectly set. Me standing over her, the torn dress, Chantel screaming on the floor, clutching her womb. Kyle was the first to react. He rushed to Chantel, dropping to his knees. Babe, can you hear me? What happened? She pushed me. Chantel sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She pushed me down because I tried on her dress. She cares more about her stupid clothes than her own nephew. My stomach hurts, Kyle. It hurts so bad. Beatrice turned to me. Her face was not the face of a mother. It was the face of a judge, and I had already been found guilty. You monster, Beatrice hissed. She walked up to me, and I thought she was going to hit me. She stopped inches from my face, trembling with rage. You possessive, selfish demon. You would hurt a pregnant woman over a piece of fabric. I knew you were cold, Simone, but I did not know you were evil. I looked at them. I looked at Kyle, pretending to check Chantel's pulse while glaring at me with hatred. I looked at Beatrice, invoking God name to curse her own daughter. I looked at the ruined dress on the floor. That dress cost $2,000, I said. My voice was steady. It was shockingly steady. Even I was surprised by how calm I sounded. Kyle stood up. His face was red. You are worried about the money, he screamed, spitting a little as he spoke. Your sister might be miscarrying, and you are quoting prices. You are sick, Simone. You are absolutely sick. I should call the police. I should have you arrested for assault. Call them, I said. Please call them. Let us have them review the security footage from the hallway. Let us have them see who broke the lock on my door. Kyle froze. The mention of police and cameras made him pause. He knew he had warrants. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. He scooped Chantel up in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing loudly. We are leaving this room, he announced like a hero in a bad movie. We are going to the living room to make sure she is okay. And you staying away from her. If anything happens to this baby Simone, I swear on my life I will destroy you. Beatrice followed them, pausing at the door to give me one last look of disgust. I am praying for your soul, Simone, because clearly you have lost it. They left. I was alone in my bedroom. The music was still playing softly from the Bluetooth speaker Chantel had connected to. I walked over and unplugged it. Silence returned to the room. I looked at the mirror. I looked at the empty space where my privacy used to be. I looked at the broken lock on my door. They expected me to cry. They expected me to run out there and apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to write them a check to make the guilt go away. That is what the old Simone would have done. The Simone who wanted to be loved. The Simone who thought that if she just gave enough, they would finally see her. But that Simone died the moment that silk dress ripped. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a fresh blazer. I put it on. I smoothed the lapels. I went to my desk and sat down. I did not cry. I did not shake. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I named the folder Eviction Protocol. I typed in the first entry. Item 4. Custom emerald silk dress. Replacement value $2,000. Item 5. Locksmith services for forced entry master suite. $300. Item 6. Emotional distress. I paused. I looked at the door where my mother had just cursed me. Price to be determined. I leaned back in my chair. They wanted a villain. They wanted a monster who cared more about money than family. Fine, I would be the villain. But they were about to learn that villains do not just get angry, villains get even. And unlike them, I had the capital to fund my war. The assassin, as they say, was awake, and she was ready to send the bill. After the incident with the dress, I retreated to my home office, seeking the only thing that never betrayed me, which was data. My office was the nerve center of my life. It was where I analyzed market trends for billion-dollar corporations and where I managed my own portfolio. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up my monitors. The glow of the screens usually calmed me, but today it revealed a violation. The system log showed 5 failed login attempts between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. Someone had tried to access my primary workstation while I was still at the office. I did not need to guess who it was. I pulled up the footage from the hidden camera I kept on the bookshelf disguised as a router. The timestamp confirmed it. At 2:15, Kyle slipped into the room. He did not look like a curious house guest. He looked like a thief. I watched him on the screen as he opened my desk drawers, rifling through bank statements and tax documents I had carelessly left in the top tier. He took photos of them with his phone. He then sat at my computer, typing furiously, trying to guess my password. I zoomed in on his hands. He was typing simple things: family names, birthdays. He thought I was simple, so he assumed my security would be simple too. When he got locked out, he slammed his fist on the desk in frustration before leaving. I leaned back in my chair, watching the footage on a loop. This was not just nosiness. This was reconnaissance. Kyle was not just a squatter, he was looking for a way to access my liquidity. He wanted to know exactly how much I was worth so he could calculate how much he could bleed from me. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. If he wanted to play financial games, he had picked the wrong opponent. I was not just a sister-in-law with a nice apartment. I was a senior risk analyst, and I was about to audit him. I decided to play along. I printed out a few dummy documents showing inflated assets in a fake offshore account and left them slightly visible under a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Then I went out to face them for dinner. The atmosphere in the dining room was tense, but they were trying to mask it with aggressive cheerfulness. Beatrice had ordered takeout using my credit card, of course. Sushi. Hundreds of dollars worth of sashimi and rolls were spread out on the table. Kyle was sitting at the head of the table, pouring himself another glass of my wine. When I sat down, he smiled. It was a predatory smile. "So, Simone," he began, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "I have been thinking. You have all this capital just sitting here. Real estate is good, sure, but it is illiquid. You need to diversify. You need high-yield velocity." I picked up my chopsticks calmly. "Is that so, Kyle? And what do you suggest?" He lit up. This was his pitch. I could see him rehearsing the lines in his head. "Crypto," he said as if he had just discovered fire. "Not the mainstream stuff. I am talking about altcoins, specifically Green Horizon. It is a new decentralized protocol based on carbon credits. I am actually a platinum partner with them. If you get in now at the ground level, we are talking 10 times returns in a month, maybe 20. He pulled out his phone, showing me a graph that looked like it had been drawn by a child or a scam artist. The line just went straight up. "I can get you in, Simone, because we are family. Usually there is a buy-in fee of 5,000, but for you I can waive it if you invest 50,000 tonight. The market is moving fast. You do not want to miss the boat." I chewed my tuna roll slowly, letting him sweat. I looked at Beatrice, who was nodding encouragingly. "Listen to him, baby," she said. "Kyle is very smart with money. He almost bought a franchise last year. He knows business." I swallowed and wiped my mouth with a napkin. I looked directly at Kyle. "Green Horizon," I said. "That is interesting. Because I actually ran a risk assessment on the carbon credit crypto market last week for a client. Most of those protocols are rug pulls. They rely on new investors to pay off the early ones. That is a Ponzi scheme, Kyle. It is not an investment." Kyle's laugh was nervous. "You are looking at the old data. This is blockchain. It is immutable. You cannot fake the blockchain, Simone. Actually, you can." I corrected him, my voice level and professional. "If the liquidity pool is not locked, the developers can drain the wallet at any time. I checked Green Horizon while you were talking. The developers are anonymous. The white paper is plagiarized from 3 different projects, and the trading volume is 90% wash trading. That means bots are buying and selling to each other to make it look like people are interested." I leaned in closer. "And about that platinum partnership, there is no such thing in a decentralized protocol. That is just a fancy title they gave you to make you feel important so you would recruit more victims. You are not a partner, Kyle. You are the exit liquidity." The table went silent. Chantel stopped chewing. Beatrice looked confused. But Kyle's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. The vein in his neck bulged. "You think you are so smart?" He spat, slamming his hand on the table, making the soy sauce jump. "Just because you work for some big-shot firm, you think you know everything. You are just a corporate drone, Simone. You push papers. I am out here in the real world building wealth. You do not understand macroeconomics. You do not understand vision." He stood up, knocking his chair back. "This is why you are single," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are too masculine. You always have to be right. You always have to emasculate men. I offer you a life-changing opportunity and you throw technicalities in my face. You know what? Keep your money. Let it rot in a savings account, losing value to inflation. When I am a millionaire, do not come crawling to me." He stormed out of the room towards the balcony, needing a cigarette to calm his nerves. Beatrice glared at me. "You did not have to embarrass him like that," she said quietly. "He is trying so hard for this family. You could have just given him a little bit, just to show support." I looked at my mother. "Support?" I asked. "You want me to support a scam that would lose me $50,000? That is not support, Mother. That is stupidity. And I did not get this penthouse by being stupid." I stood up and cleared my plate. I had confirmed what I needed to know. Kyle was desperate, he was broke, and he was deep into something shady. And now that I had bruised his ego, he would be dangerous. But he did not know that while he was trying to steal my password, I had already cracked his whole life open. The game was just getting started. The morning sun did not bring warmth to my penthouse. Instead, it illuminated the battlefield my living room had become. The air was thick with the stale smell of sleep and entitlement. Beatrice, Chantel, and Kyle were still passed out on the furniture, their snores creating a dissonant symphony that grated against my nerves. I was up at 5, dressed in my workout gear, moving silently through the apartment like a ghost in my own home. I was not going to the gym. I was going on a hunt. My target was not a person, but the truth they were trying so desperately to bury. I waited until I was sure they were in the deepest phase of REM sleep before I made my move towards the guest area. My eyes scanned the room, which was littered with the debris of their presence. Fast food wrappers, soda cans, and dirty napkins were everywhere. But I was interested in what they had tried to hide. I walked over to the small trash can in the powder room, the one they used when they thought I was not looking. It had been emptied recently, likely by Kyle trying to cover his tracks, but he was sloppy. He always had been. I pulled out the plastic liner and brought it to the kitchen island, laying it out on a layer of newspaper like I was performing an autopsy. I sifted through the refuse with a pair of rubber gloves. At first it was just mundane trash, tissues, receipt scraps, but then I found it. Buried at the bottom, wrapped inside a fast food paper bag, was a small empty glass bottle. I recognized the label immediately. It was a 50-milliliter bottle of dark liquor, the kind you buy at gas stations. The cap was chewed on a nervous habit I knew Kyle possessed. But it was the second item that made my blood run cold. It was a crumpled pack of cigarettes. Menthol. I smoothed out the box. It was empty. I brought it closer to my nose. The smell of stale tobacco was faint, but unmistakable. I looked at the expiration code on the bottom. These were bought 2 days ago in Chicago. I stood there in the silence of my kitchen staring at the evidence. Chantel claimed to be 6 months pregnant. She claimed to be high risk. She claimed the smell of my perfume made her nauseous. Yet here in my trash was proof that someone in this house was smoking and drinking. Beatrice did not smoke. She thought it was a sin. That left Kyle and Chantel. If Kyle was smoking around a pregnant woman in an enclosed apartment, he was negligent. But if Chantel was the one smoking, then she was a monster. Or she was a liar. I peeled off the gloves and threw them away. I took a photo of the evidence, carefully arranging the timestamp on my phone next to the cigarette pack. I needed more than trash. I needed biological proof. I needed a paper trail. I poured myself a black coffee and walked into my office, locking the door behind me. It was time to make a call I had been saving for an emergency. I dialed a number that was not in my contacts list. It belonged to Tyrell, a former insurance fraud investigator, who now ran a private detective agency in Atlanta. We had worked together on a case years ago involving a fake slip-and-fall scam against one of my client companies. Tyrell was expensive, but he was thorough, and he knew how to find things that did not want to be found. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Vance, you know it is 6 in the morning, right? I need a rush job, Tyrell," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Full background check. Medical claims, insurance history, and pharmacy records if you can get them legally. The subject is Chantel Vance, my sister." There was a pause on the other line. I could hear the sound of a lighter flicking. "Your sister?" Tyrell asked. "Trouble in paradise, Simone. You have no idea. She claims she is pregnant. High risk. She says she has been seeing a specialist in Buckhead. I need to know if that is true. I need to know if there is a baby Tyrell or if I am being conned by my own blood. I will see what I can do. Give me 4 hours." 4 hours felt like 4 years. I spent the morning working on my laptop, listening to the sounds of my family waking up. I heard Chantel complaining about the firmness of the sofa. I heard Kyle demanding breakfast. I heard Beatrice humming a gospel song while she likely went through my refrigerator. I stayed in my office, the door locked, the evidence of their deception burning a hole in my digital folder. At 10:30, my email pinged. The subject line was simply, "Report." I opened the PDF, my hand hovering over the mouse. The document was dense, filled with credit scores and address histories, but I scrolled down to the medical section. Tyrell had pulled her insurance claims for the last 12 months. If Chantel was seeing a specialist, if she was getting ultrasounds, if she was buying prenatal vitamins, it would be here. I scanned the list. January, urgent care visit for a sprained ankle. March, prescription for antibiotics. Sinus infection. May, dental cleaning. June, July, August, September. Nothing. There were no OBGYN visits, no prescriptions for folic acid, no ultrasound billings, no hospital pre-registration. I read the summary note Tyrell had attached at the bottom. Subject has no record of prenatal care in the state of Georgia. No active insurance claims related to pregnancy. Additionally, search local pharmacy databases for prenatal vitamin purchases under her ID negative. However, credit card statements show consistent purchases at Total Wine and Spirit throughout the last 3 months, including last week. Simone, she is not pregnant. She is playing you. I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a long, slow exhale. I was right. There was no baby. The belly was padding. The nausea was acting. The demands for the master bedroom and the organic food were all part of a script she had written to invade my home. It was diabolical. But as I looked at the screen, a wave of cold familiarity washed over me. This was not the first time Chantel had used her body as a weapon. This was not the first time she had faked a crisis to steal my moment. My mind drifted back 20 years. I was 50. It was the summer before my junior year, and I had been accepted into a prestigious science camp at Georgia Tech. It was a full scholarship. It was my ticket out. I had packed my bags 2 weeks early, folding my t-shirts with military precision. I was going to be away for a month, living in a dorm surrounded by people who cared about chemistry and calculus, not gossip and church hats. The morning I was supposed to leave, Chantel woke up screaming. She was 12. She lay in her bed, clutching her stomach, thrashing around as if she were dying. Beatrice rushed in, panic written all over her face. "My tummy, Mommy, it hurts. It feels like knives." Chantel cried, tears streaming down her face. "Do not leave me, Mommy. I am scared." Beatrice turned to me, her eyes wild. "Simone, put your bags down. We have to take your sister to the emergency room. But Mom, the bus leaves in an hour. If I miss it, I lose my spot. Dad can take her." "Your father is at work," Beatrice snapped. "You are selfish, Simone. Your sister is in agony and you are worried about some camp. You are not going. I need you to stay here and watch the house while I take her. I missed the bus. I missed the camp. I lost the scholarship. Later that afternoon, they came back. The doctors found nothing. They called it a phantom pain, probably indigestion. 2 hours later, while I sat in my room crying over my lost summer, I looked out the window. Chantel was in the backyard, running through the sprinkler, eating a popsicle, laughing. She saw me looking at her. She did not wave. She just smiled a small, triumphant smile and continued to play. She had stolen my summer with a stomach ache. Now she was trying to steal my house with a pregnancy. The pattern was identical. The stakes were just higher. I closed the laptop with a snap. The flashback did not make me sad anymore. It made me dangerous. Because this time I was not a 15-year-old girl dependent on my mother for permission. I was a 35-year-old woman with the deed to the penthouse and a dossier of truth. I stood up and walked to the mirror, checking my appearance. I looked calm. I looked professional. I looked like someone who was about to terminate a very bad investment. I unlocked my office door and walked out into the living room. Chantel was sitting on the sofa eating a bowl of cereal. She looked up at me, rubbing her fake belly with one hand. "Hey, sis," she said, her mouth full of milk. "We are out of oat milk. You need to go to the store. The baby needs calcium." I looked at her. I looked at the belly that held nothing but lies and padding. "I will get right on that," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I have a few errands to run anyway." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my keys. I was not going to the grocery store. I was going to the bank. And then I was going to prepare the stage for the final act. They wanted a show. I was going to give them a finale they would never forget. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks away from my own building. The engine was off, but the air around me felt charged with electricity. I was holding my phone, my thumb hovering over the email app. Tyrell had sent the final file. The subject line was simply the address of my childhood home in Atlanta, 1402 Peachtree Lane, a house that had been paid off by my father 20 years ago. A house that was supposed to be the family anchor. A house that Beatrice swore she would never leave. I opened the attachment. It was not a title deed. It was a foreclosure notice. The document was scanned in high resolution and every pixel screamed disaster. The header read, Fulton County Sheriff Department. Below that, in bold, unforgiving letters, notice of sale under power. I zoomed in on the dates. The foreclosure was not pending, it was final. The auction had taken place 2 weeks ago. The locks had been changed. The eviction notice had been posted on the front door. My breath hitched. I felt a strange mixture of hollow sadness and burning clarity. The house where I had learned to walk. The house where I had hidden in my room to study while my mother praised Chantel downstairs. The house that held the ghost of my father. It was gone. It did not belong to the Vance family anymore. It belonged to a bank holding company in Delaware. I scrolled down to the eviction report. The property was vacated on the 12th. That was exactly 3 days before they showed up in my lobby. The timeline clicked into place like the tumblers of a safe. The sudden visit, the desperate demand for $15,000, the excessive luggage. They were not here on vacation. They were not here to start a business. They were here because they were homeless. I looked up at the rearview mirror, staring at my own eyes. They had lied to me. Not a small lie, not a white lie. They had constructed a massive, elaborate reality to hide the fact that they were destitute. Beatrice had stood in my living room judging my furniture, while knowing she did not even own a bed anymore. Chantel had mocked my career, while knowing that without me, they would be sleeping in a shelter. The audacity was not just personality flaw anymore. It was a survival mechanism. They were drowning, and they had decided that I was going to be their life raft, whether I wanted to be or not. But the foreclosure was only the symptom. I needed to know the disease. I opened the second file Tyrell had attached. It was a financial forensic report on the property title history. My father had left that house free and clear. There was no mortgage. So how did a bank seize it? The answer was on page 3. A home equity line of credit. A HELOC taken out 2 years ago. The principal amount was $200,000, the maximum equity available. The signature on the loan document was Beatrice Vance, but the CO signer, the guarantor who had supposedly verified the income to secure the loan, it was Kyle Jenkins. I read through the transaction history. The money did not go into home repairs. It did not go into medical bills. It went into a series of wire transfers to offshore accounts. Malta, Cyprus, the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary names were gibberish: digital wallets, crypto exchanges, online sports betting platforms. Kyle had gambled the house away. I could see exactly how it happened. He must have convinced Beatrice that he had a sure thing, a system, a visionary investment that would double their money and let them live like royalty. Beatrice, who always believed that men were the head of the household and could do no wrong, would have signed whatever he put in front of her. She trusted him more than she trusted math. And he had bled her dry. He had taken a $200,000 asset and turned it into zero in 24 months. He had lost the roof over his pregnant wife's head. No, wait. His not pregnant wife. They were both in on it. They had burned down their lives in Atlanta, and now they were standing in the ashes looking for a new host, me. They did not want $15,000 for a startup. They wanted $15,000 to likely pay off a bookie or to put a deposit on a rental they could not afford. Or worse, they wanted the money to keep up the charade while they slowly took over my apartment. I looked at the luggage count again in my mind. 6 suitcases, winter coats, boots, photo albums. Beatrice had brought her large family Bible, the one she usually kept on the mantel. You do not bring the family Bible on a weekend trip. You bring it when you are moving. They were not guests. They were refugees. But they were refugees who had come with knives behind their backs instead of open hands. If they had come to me and told me the truth, if they had said, "Simone, we messed up. We lost the house. We have nowhere to go," I would have helped. I would have rented them an apartment. I would have bought them groceries. Because despite everything, I still had a heart. But they did not ask for help. They demanded it. They tried to trick me. They tried to bully me. They tried to steal from me. And that changed everything. They were not family in need. They were a hostile acquisition team. And I was the target company. I needed to know their endgame. I switched apps on my phone, opening the security camera feed again. I had rebooted the router remotely while I was driving, forcing the system to come back online. They did not know the cameras were recording again. The feed from the living room loaded. The image was crisp and clear. They were comfortable now. Too comfortable. Beatrice was lying on my sofa with her feet up on the cushions, wearing one of my silk robes. Kyle was sitting at my dining table eating the sushi leftovers from last night right out of the container. Chantel was painting her toenails using my coffee table as a footrest. I turned up the volume on my phone, holding it to my ear. "So, what is the plan?" Chantel asked, blowing on her wet nails. "She is going to figure it out eventually. Simone is uptight, but she is not stupid." Kyle laughed with his mouth full. "Do not worry about it, babe. I did some reading. Chicago has very strict tenant laws. Once we have been here for a certain number of days, we establish residency. It is called adverse possession or something like that. Basically, she cannot just kick us out. She has to go through the courts. That takes months, sometimes years." Beatrice chuckled. A low, dark sound. "And she won't do that. Simone is too proud. She cares too much about what her rich white neighbors think. Can you imagine the scandal if she tries to evict her own mother? The church would shun her. Her job would probably fire her. No, she is trapped. She just does not know it yet." My blood turned to ice. They were not just hoping to stay. They were planning a siege. They were counting on my shame to keep me silent. They were weaponizing my success against me. They thought my reputation was a cage that would keep me compliant while they drained my resources. "We just need to get her to sign that paper for the $15,000 first," Kyle continued. "I need that cash to get the collectors off my back in Georgia. Once we have the cash and we have established residency, we are set. We can live here rent-free. We can make her cook for us. We can run this place. It is the least she owes us after running away and leaving us with nothing. Leaving you with nothing, I whispered to the empty car. You had a paid-off house. You had a life. You destroyed it. I watched Beatrice nod in agreement. That is right. It is God will. The wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. We are just taking back what belongs to the family. I turned off the phone. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. The sadness I had felt earlier was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard determination. They thought they were playing chess. They thought they had me in checkmate because I was bound by the rules of society and family. But they forgot one thing. I was a risk analyst. I dealt with hostile takeovers for a living. I knew exactly how to dismantle a bad investment. You do not negotiate with it. You do not hope it gets better. You liquidate it. I started the car. The engine purred to life. I was not going back to the apartment as a victim. I was going back as the executioner. They wanted to use the law. They wanted to talk about residency and rights. Fine. I would give them a lesson in law they would never forget. I drove toward the bank, but not to withdraw money. I was going to print the documents Tyrell had sent me. The foreclosure notice, the gambling transfers, the fake pregnancy report. And then I was going to stop at an office supply store. If I was going to present them with a bill, I needed to make sure it was itemized. I needed to make sure every single lie had a price tag attached to it. And tonight at dinner, I was going to collect. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, not as the executioner I felt like inside, but as the defeated daughter they wanted me to be. I had spent an hour in front of the mirror practicing my expression. I let my shoulders slump slightly. I wore a soft, oversized cardigan instead of my usual power blazer. I even skipped my mascara so my eyes looked tired and red-rimmed, as if I had been crying all night. It was a costume designed for a specific audience, and when I entered the room, I saw that the audience was ready. Beatrice was at the stove frying bacon she had found in the back of my freezer. Kyle was scrolling on his phone legs up on the table. Chantel was drinking my orange juice. When they saw me, the room went quiet. They were waiting for a fight. They were waiting for another eviction threat, or a lecture about the dress. Instead, I walked over to the coffee machine and sighed a long, shaky exhale that sounded like surrender. I am sorry, I said, my voice quiet and broken. I have been doing a lot of thinking since yesterday. About what you said, Mom. About family obligation. Beatrice turned around slowly, the spatula dripping grease onto the floor. Her eyes widened. She smelled blood in the water. What did you say, baby? She asked, her voice softening into that manipulative sweetness that always made my skin crawl. I said you were right. I continued staring into my black coffee. I have been selfish. I have been so focused on my career and my assets that I forgot what really matters. Chantel is pregnant. You guys are struggling. And here I am worrying about a stupid dress and some wine. It was wrong of me. Kyle dropped his feet from the table and sat up straight. A smug grin spread across his face. Well, it takes a big person to admit when they are wrong, Simone, he said. I knew you would come around. You just needed a reality check. We are not asking for much. We just want what is fair. I nodded, keeping my eyes downcast so they could not see the cold calculation burning in them. I want to help, I said. I really do. I looked at my finances last night. I cannot liquidate the penthouse because of the mortgage terms, but I have something else. I own a small studio apartment in the Loop. It was an investment property. I called my broker this morning. If I list it below market value, I can get a cash offer within 48 hours. It would net about $100,000 after taxes. The silence in the room was deafening. I could practically hear their hearts beating faster. $100,000. To them, it was a lottery ticket. To me, it was a fictional number attached to a fictional apartment that did not exist. You would do that for us? Chantel asked, her voice trembling with greed. You would give us the money. I would give you the $15,000 you asked for, plus enough to get settled properly. I lied effortlessly, but I need to move fast. My broker needs authorization to expedite the sale, and because the property is technically in a trust, I need family verification to unlock the funds. It is just bureaucratic red tape. Beatrice dropped the spatula. She rushed over and hugged me, burying me in her gardenia perfume. Praise Jesus, she cried, rocking me back and forth. I knew the Lord would touch your heart, Simone. I prayed all night for this. I prayed for the spirit of generosity to enter you. This is a miracle. I stood stiffly in her embrace, counting down the seconds. There is just one thing, I said, pulling away gently. Since this involves a large transfer and bank compliance, I need everyone to sign some paperwork. Just standard affidavits stating that you are my family and that I am authorized to act on your behalf. My lawyer sent them over this morning. Once they are signed, I can wire the funds. Kyle stood up, rubbing his hands together. Sign where, he said, laughing. I will sign anything. Let us get this money moving. I have investors waiting on me. I walked to my office and retrieved the stack of documents I had prepared the night before. I had printed them on thick, heavy bond paper, the kind lawyers use for wills and settlements. It gave them an air of legitimacy. I placed the stack on the kitchen island next to the plate of bacon. It was a thick pile. At the top was a generic-looking cover sheet with the logo of a fake law firm I had created in Photoshop. Underneath that, however, were the teeth of the trap. I watched them gather around the island like sharks around a wounded seal. Kyle picked up a pen instantly. He did not even look at the title of the document. He just looked at me. Where do I sign? He asked. I flipped to the last page of the first document. Right here, I pointed to the line marked guarantor. An initial here on the bottom of every page. Kyle scribbled his signature with a flourish. He felt powerful. He felt like he had won. He started passing the papers to Chantel and Beatrice. Here, babe, sign this so we can get paid, he said. Beatrice, you too. This is just legal mumbo-jumbo for the bank. I watched them. I watched my mother, who claimed to be so wise, blindly sign her name next to a paragraph that explicitly stated she accepted joint and several liability for all damages to the property. I watched Chantel, who claimed to be so careful about her health, sign a waiver that acknowledged she had no medical conditions that prevented her from being evicted. And I watched Kyle, the self-proclaimed financial genius, sign a promissory note that was not a receipt for a gift, but a confession of judgment. They did not read a single word, not one line, not. They were too drunk on the idea of easy money. They saw the zeros in their heads, and that blinded them to the text in front of their eyes. If they had read page 3, paragraph 4, they would have seen that they were signing a fixed-term short-stay rental agreement. The daily rate was listed at $500. If they had read page 5, they would have seen the clause regarding destruction of property, where they agreed to pay 3 times the replacement value for any item damaged during their stay. And most importantly, if they had read the fine print on page 7, they would have seen that they were waiving their rights to tenancy laws in the state of Illinois, effectively classifying themselves as hotel guests who could be removed for non-payment immediately without a court order. But they did not read. They just signed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound of the pen on the paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Make sure you date it, I reminded them, helpful and polite. Today is the 15th. Kyle finished the last signature and slammed the pen down. Done, he announced. So when does the cash hit? I gathered the papers, stacking them neatly and tapping them on the counter to align the edges. I held the stack to my chest. I held their financial souls in my hands. The broker needs 24 hours to process the sale, I said. We should have the liquidity by tomorrow night. Kyle pumped his fist. Yes, tomorrow we feast. Simone, you finally did the right thing. I am proud of you. I am going to buy a new suit. I need to look the part when I start expanding my business. Chantel was beaming, rubbing her fake belly. I am going to buy the best stroller money can buy. And maybe a new wardrobe. This pregnancy has been so hard on my body, I deserve a treat. Beatrice was humming a hymn. Her eyes closed, her hands raised in praise. God is good, she whispered. God provides. I looked at them one last time. The joy on their faces was grotesque, because it was fueled by my supposed submission. They were happy because they thought they had successfully harvested me. They thought I was the crop and they were the locusts. I will take these to the office to scan them, I said, turning away, so they would not see the smirk that was fighting to break through my mask. Why don't we have a celebratory dinner tomorrow night? I will invite some people, a few of my colleagues, maybe the pastor you like, Mom. We can announce the good news then. Beatrice clapped her hands. Oh, that sounds wonderful, Simone. A testimony dinner. We will testify to how the Lord restored this family. Yes, I thought walking back to my office. We certainly will testify. I sat down at my desk and locked the door. I looked at the signatures. Kyle Jenkins, Chantel Vance, Beatrice Vance. They were clear. They were notarized by my presence. They were legally binding. They thought they had signed a receipt for a windfall. In reality, they had just signed a confession. They had just agreed to pay for every single minute of their intrusion. They had agreed to pay for the wine, the dress, the stress. And the best part was, they had done it with a smile. I scanned the documents into my secure server. Then I opened my email and sent the invites for the dinner party. I invited my mother's favorite pastor. I invited my cousin Jasmine. I invited a few of my neighbors. But the most important guest I invited was not a person. It was the truth. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the itemized bill I had been drafting. It was almost complete. Now I could add the legal fees. I typed in the final number. It was staggering. It was fair. Tomorrow night the feast would end, and the bill would come due. The preparations for the dinner began at dawn the next day. If I was going to execute a public humiliation, it had to be plated on fine china and served with vintage champagne. I hired a private catering company, one that usually serviced the high-end charity galas in the city. I wanted the smell of truffle oil and roasted lamb to mask the scent of the legal slaughter that was about to take place. I watched as the staff set up the dining room, covering my mahogany table with a white linen cloth that cost more than my mother's car. I arranged the flowers myself, white lilies and hydrangeas, innocent and pure, just like the role I was playing. Beatrice sat on the sofa, watching the activity with a look of smug satisfaction. She believed this was her coronation. She believed this feast was my way of repenting for my independence. I walked over to her holding a cup of herbal tea, my movements slow and deferential. Mom, I said, keeping my voice soft. Since we are celebrating the family getting back on its feet and the new investment, I was thinking we should make it official. Why do not you invite Pastor Johnson? I know he is in Chicago for that conference. It would mean a lot to have him bless the funds. Beatrice's eyes lit up. To her, Pastor Johnson was not just a religious leader, he was a status symbol. Having him witness her triumph would be the ultimate validation. That is a wonderful idea, Simone, she said, taking the tea. It is important to have a man of God present when chains are broken. I will call him right now, and maybe I should invite your Aunt Sarah and Uncle Marcus too. They live in the South Side now, right? They should see what the Lord has done. I nodded, hiding my smile. Yes, invite them all. The more the merrier. I wanted witnesses. I wanted a jury. When the truth came out, I did not want it to be my word against theirs. I wanted the most respected people in our community to see the receipts. I wanted Aunt Sarah, who was the family gossip, to spread the news of their fraud faster than a wildfire. Beatrice spent the next 3 hours on the phone. I could hear her voice drifting from the balcony where she paced back and forth, looking out at the skyline she thought she now owned. Yes, girl. Simone has finally come to her senses. She is giving us the capital to start the business. Yes, 100,000. We are going to partner with her. You know how it is raising children. Sometimes they stray, but they always come back to the root. She was rewriting history in real time. In her version, I was the prodigal daughter, returning home to be saved by her wisdom. She did not mention the foreclosure. She did not mention the fake pregnancy. She spun a tale of generational wealth and divine favor. Chantel was just as busy. She was in the guest bathroom getting ready. She had demanded that I pay for a makeup artist to come to the house. I agreed. I added the $300 fee to the bill. I watched her posing in the mirror, rubbing her padded stomach, practicing her surprised face for when I would hand over the check. "I cannot believe we are finally getting what we deserve," Chantel said to her reflection. "This is going to change everything. No more riding the bus. No more dodging calls from landlords. We are going to be elite." She came out of the bathroom wearing another one of my dresses. This one was a loose-fitting caftan that I wore for beach vacations. It draped over her fake bump perfectly. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning around. "Do I look like a CEO wife?" "You look expensive," I said, truth and sarcasm blending perfectly in my tone. Kyle was the last to get ready. He had disappeared into the guest room with a garment bag I had not seen him bring in. I assumed he had gone out to buy a cheap suit with the credit card I had foolishly left on the counter earlier that week. I was wrong. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. The guests began to filter in. Pastor Johnson arrived first, a tall, imposing man with a booming voice and a suit that cost more than most people's rent. He hugged Beatrice and then turned to me. "Simone, it is good to see you honoring your mother," he said, his voice thick with judgment. "The Bible says honor thy father and mother so that your days may be long. You are doing a righteous thing tonight." "Thank you, Pastor," I said, shaking his hand. "Tonight is definitely about revealing the truth and honoring what is real." Aunt Sarah and Uncle Marcus arrived next, looking around the penthouse with wide eyes. They whispered to each other, pointing at the art and the view. Beatrice greeted them like she was the lady of the manor, offering them drinks from a tray held by a waiter I had hired. "Make yourselves at home," Beatrice said, waving her hand grandly. "This is the family estate now. We are all going to be spending a lot of time here." I stood by the kitchen island watching them. My heart was beating a steady rhythm of anticipation. I checked my phone. The projector was synced. The files were queued. The printer in my office had finished its job. Everything was ready. Then Kyle walked into the room. The air left my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The glass of water I was holding nearly slipped from my hand. He was not wearing a cheap suit from a department store. He was wearing a charcoal gray three-piece suit with a subtle pinstripe. The jacket was slightly too broad for his shoulders, and the pants were a fraction too long, bunching at his shoes. But I knew that suit. I knew every stitch of it. It was my father's suit. It was the suit my father had worn to my college graduation. It was the suit he was buried in. Or at least I thought he was buried in it. Beatrice must have kept it. She must have saved it, not for sentiment, but for this. For Kyle. Kyle walked into the living room, buttoning the jacket with a smirk. He had paired it with a gaudy gold tie that clashed horribly with the elegance of the tailoring. He looked like a child playing dress-up in a giant's clothes. But the disrespect was so visceral it made my vision blur. That suit represented the only man in my life who had ever loved me unconditionally. The man who taught me to save. The man who told me I was smart. And now this grifter, this leech, was wearing it like a costume while he plotted to steal my father's legacy. He walked up to Uncle Marcus, puffing out his chest. "Glad you could make it," Marcus Kyle said, his voice booming. "Welcome to the headquarters. We have big things planned." "Big things. Simone is finally letting me take the wheel on the investments. You know women are good at saving, but you need a man vision to really grow wealth." Uncle Marcus nodded, seemingly impressed by the suit and the confidence. "That is good to hear, Kyle. It is good to see a man stepping up." Kyle took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a massive gulp. "Yeah, well, it is about time. I have been telling Beatrice for years that we needed to consolidate the assets. This crypto venture I am launching is going to put us on the Forbes list. You should get in on it, Marcus. Friends and family discount." I watched him from across the room. I watched him spill a drop of champagne on my father's lapel. He wiped it off carelessly with his thumb. The rage that had been a cold knot in my stomach turned into a supernova. It was no longer just about the money. It was no longer just about the apartment. It was a violation of the dead. He was wearing the skin of a better man to sell his lies. I signaled the head waiter. "Let us seat the guests," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "It is time for dinner." Beatrice clapped her hands. "Yes, everyone please sit. The food smells divine. And after we eat, Simone has a special presentation for us." Kyle walked to the head of the table. "My seat." He pulled out the chair and sat down, spreading his legs wide, claiming the space. "Sit down, everyone," he commanded. "Let us eat. I am starving." Being a CEO works up an appetite. I walked to the other end of the table. I did not sit. I stood behind my chair, my hands resting on the cool wood. I looked at Kyle in my father's suit. I looked at Chantel in my dress. I looked at Beatrice in my robe. They were all wearing costumes. They were all playing parts. I looked at Pastor Johnson, who was waiting expectantly for a prayer. "Before we pray, Pastor," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to silence the room, "I have a few words to say, and I have a few gifts to distribute." Beatrice beamed. "Go ahead, baby. Bless us." I reached under the table and pulled out the red envelopes. They were heavy. They felt like justice. I walked toward Kyle first. The distance between us felt like a mile, but I crossed it in seconds. I placed the envelope on his plate right next to the hand that was wearing my father's sleeve. "For you, Kyle," I said. "For your vision." He grinned, showing all his teeth. "Thanks, Simone." I walked to Chantel and placed one in front of her. "For the baby," I said. And finally one for Beatrice. "For the family," I said. I returned to my spot and picked up the remote control for the projector screen that was hidden in the ceiling. "Open them," I commanded. And as the sound of tearing paper filled the room, I pressed the button. The screen descended slowly behind me, a white canvas ready to paint their destruction in high definition. The setup was over. The execution had begun. The room fell silent as Beatrice tapped her silver fork against the rim of her crystal wineglass. The sharp ringing sound cut through the murmurs of the guests and the clinking of silverware. She stood up slowly, smoothing the front of the silk robe she had stolen from my closet, which she had decided was appropriate formal wear for the evening. She looked around this table, her eyes glistening with tears that were partly theatrical and partly genuine joy at the prospect of finally accessing my bank account. She placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder, squeezing the fabric of my father's suit as if claiming ownership of the man who used to wear it. "Family and friends," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "We are gathered here tonight to witness a miracle. For a long time there was a distance in this family, a spiritual gap. My daughter Simone was lost in the wilderness of the world, chasing career and money, forgetting her roots. But the Lord is a shepherd who brings back every lost sheep." She paused for dramatic effect, looking at Pastor Johnson, who nodded solemnly, his mouth full of my expensive lamb chops. "Tonight we celebrate not just a business partnership, but a restoration. Simone has opened her heart and her wallet to support her sister and her brother-in-law. She has realized that success means nothing if you do not share it with your blood. She is gifting us the seed money to start a legacy that will last for generations. $100,000. It is a lot of money to some, but to God, it is just a tool. And Simone is finally allowing herself to be used by God." She turned to me, beaming. "Simone, baby, come up here. Bring the blessing. Let us show everyone how the Vance family takes care of its own." The guests clapped politely. Aunt Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her eyes wide with jealousy and anticipation. Uncle Marcus looked at Kyle with new respect, thinking the unemployed grifter was about to become a tycoon. The air in the room was thick with greed. They were all looking at me, but they were not seeing a person. They were seeing a checkbook with legs. I picked up the 3 red envelopes from the side table. They were made of heavy cardstock with gold leaf trim. They looked festive. They looked expensive. They looked like they contained the keys to the kingdom. I walked toward the head of the table where they were seated. My steps were slow and deliberate. I felt calm. It was the calm of a sniper who has waited 3 days for the wind to die down and the target to stop moving. I looked at Kyle. He was leaning back in my father's chair, one arm draped over the back, looking at me with a smirk that said, "I told you so." He thought he had broken me. He thought his little speech about masculine energy and vision had actually worked. He had no idea that I was not submitting. I was loading the gun. I reached the head of the table. I stood between Beatrice and Kyle. I looked at Chantel, who was rubbing her belly and smiling at her husband. "You are right, Mother," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I have been thinking a lot about value. I have been thinking about what things cost and who pays for them. I have been thinking about the price of family." I held up the envelopes. "You asked for $15,000 to start, but I decided that was not enough. I decided that we needed to be precise. We needed to be accurate. So I prepared these for you." I handed the first envelope to Kyle. He snatched it from my hand, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was clammy. "Thanks, Simone," he said, winking at me. "You won't regret this." I handed the second one to Chantel. She squealed a little sound of delight. "And one for you, Mother," I said, placing the last envelope in Beatrice's hand. "Because you are the architect of all this." Beatrice clutched the envelope to her chest, closing her eyes. "Thank you, Jesus," she whispered. I took a step back. I walked over to the wall where the projector screen had lowered. I picked up the remote, but I kept it hidden in my palm. "Go ahead," I said. "Open them." The sound of tearing paper filled the room. It was a violent sound. Kyle ripped his open with his teeth, spitting out a piece of red paper. Chantel used a butter knife. Beatrice peeled hers open slowly, savoring the moment. Kyle was the first to pull out the document inside. He unfolded it, expecting to see a cashier's check or a bank draft. He expected to see a string of zeros followed by my signature. He stared at the paper. His smile froze. Then it twitched. Then it vanished, completely replaced by a look of utter confusion. He turned the paper over, looking at the back, then looked at the front again. He squinted as if the words were written in a foreign language. "What is this?" he muttered. "This is not a check." Chantel pulled her paper out. She looked at it and gasped. "Simone, what is this? It looks like a bill." Beatrice was staring at her document, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I do not understand," she said, looking at me with panic rising in her eyes. "Where is the money, Simone? Where is the investment?" I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of the wolf who has finally dropped the sheepskin. "It is an investment, Mother," I said. "I am investing in the truth. Kyle, why do not you read that document out loud? I want Pastor Johnson and Uncle Marcus to hear the terms of our transaction." Kyle slammed the paper down on the table. "I am not reading this garbage," he shouted. "This is a joke, right? You are playing a joke. Read it," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, turning into the voice I used when I fired incompetent traitors. "Read it, Kyle. Or do I need to project it on the screen for everyone to see?" Kyle looked around the room. The guests were staring at him. Pastor Johnson looked confused. Aunt Sarah was craning her neck to see the paper. Kyle realized he was cornered. He picked up the paper, his hands shaking with rage. "It says invoice," he spat the word out. "Keep going," I said. "Read the line items." Kyle took a deep breath, his face turning a blotchy purple. "Accommodation services." He read, his voice tight. "Penthouse suite, 10 nights at $500 a night. Subtotal, $5,000. A ripple of whispers went through the room. $500 a night. That was the rate of the Four Seasons. "Continue," I said, crossing my arms. "Cleaning fee." He read through gritted teeth. "Hazardous waste removal and deep cleaning, $2,000. Hazardous waste." Aunt Sarah whispered loudly. What in the world were they doing in there? Kyle glared at me, but I just raised my eyebrows, waiting. Property damage. He read faster now, wanting to get it over with. Replacement of custom emerald silk dress, destroyed by tenant. $2,000. Chantel let out a sob. It was an accident, she wailed. Keep reading, I said, cutting her off. Vintage alcohol consumption, he read. Chateau Margaux, 1998. $800. Uncle Marcus whistled low. That is some expensive juice. And the last item, Kyle, I asked, stepping closer to him. Read the last item. It is my favorite. Kyle looked at the paper. He did not want to say it. He looked at Beatrice, begging her to intervene, but she was frozen in shock. Emotional distress and legal consultation fees, he whispered. $5,200. Total, I prompted. Total $15,000, he yelled, throwing the paper at me. It fluttered harmlessly to the floor. You are crazy, he screamed, standing up and knocking his chair over. You think we are going to pay this? We are family. You cannot charge your family for staying in your house. You are sick, Simone. You lured us here with a dinner to humiliate us. I watched him rant. I watched the spit fly from his mouth. I waited until he was finished, until the echo of his shouting died down in the large room. I am not crazy, Kyle, I said calmly. And you are right. I cannot charge family, but I can charge tenants. I picked up the remote and pressed the button. The projector screen behind me flared to life. A massive image appeared. It was a digital scan of the document they had signed yesterday. Their signatures were blown up to the size of watermelons. You signed a contract, I said, pointing at the screen. Yesterday morning. You thought it was a release form for the money. But you did not read it, did you? You were so greedy you just signed your names. I clicked the remote, zooming in on paragraph 4, section 4. A, I read aloud. The undersigned agrees to the terms of a short-term rental agreement at the rate of $500 per day. The undersigned acknowledges that they are not establishing tenancy rights and can be removed for non-payment immediately. I clicked again, zooming in on the liability clause. Section 9B. The undersigned accepts full financial responsibility for any damage to the property or assets of the owner, including but not limited to clothing and consumables. The room was deadly silent. Pastor Johnson had stopped eating. Aunt Sarah had her hand over her mouth. You scammed us, Beatrice shrieked, standing up. You tricked your own mother. You made us sign a trap. I did not trick you, I said, my voice cold as ice. I gave you a document. You are adults. You chose not to read it. That is not a trick, Mother. That is negligence. And in the real world, negligence costs money. I walked over to the table and picked up the invoice Kyle had thrown. I smoothed it out and placed it gently back in front of him. This is not a gift, I said. This is a bill, and it is due immediately. Kyle laughed, a desperate, unhinged sound. You think I have $15,000? We are broke, Simone. You know we are broke. That is why we are here. You cannot get blood from a stone. I know you are broke, I said. I know you do not have the money. But you do have something else. I looked at him up and down. I looked at the suit he was wearing. My father's suit. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen changed. It was no longer the contract. It was a foreclosure notice. 1402 Peachtree Lane. And next to it was a wire transfer record showing $200,000 leaving the home equity account and going into a crypto wallet registered to Kyle Jenkins. The gasp from the room was audible. Beatrice turned to look at the screen. She saw her address. She saw the word foreclosure. She saw Kyle's name. What is this? She whispered. Kyle, what is this? You told me the bank made a mistake. You told me we were refinancing. Kyle's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost in a stolen suit. I can explain, babe, he stammered, backing away. It is complicated. The market crashed. I was going to fix it. I just needed more time. He stole your house, mother, I said. He gambled it away. You are not here because you want to be close to me. You are here because you are homeless, and you tried to make me pay for his mistakes. I turned to the guests. I am sorry to ruin your dinner, I said, but the party is over. I turned back to Kyle. You cannot pay the bill with cash, I said, but you are going to pay it with dignity. Get out, all of you, right now. Kyle looked around the room looking for an ally, but even Beatrice was looking at him with horror. The golden child facade had cracked, and the rot was pouring out for everyone to see. You cannot kick us out. He tried one last time, his voice weak. We have rights. I pointed at the screen. Read the contract again, Kyle. You waived your rights. You are trespassing, and I have security waiting in the hallway. I walked to the door and opened it. Two large men in black suits stepped in. They were not waiters. They were private security. Escort them out, I said, and make sure they do not take anything that does not belong to them, especially the suit. Kyle looked down at my father's clothes. He looked at me. You want me to take the suit off? He asked in disbelief. I want my father's legacy back, I said. You can leave in your underwear for all I care, but that suit stays here. The humiliation was complete. The bill had been delivered, and now it was time for collection. The silence that followed my declaration was brief and brittle, like a sheet of glass just before it shatters. Beatrice was the one to break it. Her face, which had been frozen in shock, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was not the face of a mother looking at her child. It was the face of a cornered animal realizing the trap had snapped shut. She let out a scream that was so high and piercing, it made the crystal glasses on the table vibrate. It was a sound of denial, a refusal to accept the reality I had just forced upon her. She grabbed the heavy crystal water goblet in front of her. I saw the muscles in her arm tense, and I knew what was coming, but I did not flinch. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cower. You devil, she shrieked. You ungrateful lying devil, you are trying to destroy this family. She hurled the glass. It flew across the table, the water arching through the air like liquid diamonds. It struck me on the shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise before shattering on the floor behind me. Water soaked into my silk blouse, turning the fabric dark and heavy, but I stood still. I did not wipe it off. I wore the stain like a badge of honor. It was physical proof of her violence, proof that under the church hats and the gospel hymns, she was capable of harm. See that, Pastor Johnson, I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. That is the spirit of this family, violence when confronted with truth. Kyle did not scream. He growled. It was a low, guttural sound that came from deep within his chest. The humiliation of being exposed in front of another man, especially a man he was trying to impress. Like Uncle Marcus was too much for his fragile ego to bear. He pushed his chair back so hard it toppled over with a crash. He stood up, his face purple with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. You think you are funny? He yelled, stepping toward me. You think you can embarrass me in front of these people? I am the man of this house. I am the authority here. I will teach you some respect, Simone. I will beat it into you if I have to. He lunged. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. He vaulted over the corner of the table, knocking over a vase of lilies. He was coming for my throat. I saw the intent in his eyes. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence me. But he never reached me. Before he could take 3 steps, the 2 waiters who had been standing quietly by the door moved. They moved with a speed and precision that revealed their true profession. They were not servers. They were private security contractors, ex-military men I had hired specifically for this moment. The first guard, a man named David, stepped in front of me, intercepting Kyle like a linebacker. He grabbed Kyle's raised arm, twisting it behind his back in a fluid motion that used Kyle's own momentum against him. Kyle let out a yelp of pain as his face was pressed firmly against the wall. "Let go of me," he shouted, kicking his legs. "Do you know who I am? I am a CEO. This is assault. Beatrice, call the police." The second guard moved to secure the perimeter, standing between the guests and the chaos, ensuring that no one else would try to intervene. I looked at Kyle pinned against my expensive wallpaper. I looked at Beatrice, who was standing with her hand over her mouth, her chest heaving. "I told you, Kyle," I said, my voice cutting through his groans. "The bill is due. And since you cannot pay with cash, you are paying with your pride. David, hold him there. He needs to see this. He needs to see the presentation." I turned back to the projector screen. The image of the foreclosure notice was still glowing bright and accusatory. But that was just the opening act. I had prepared a comprehensive audit of their deception, and I intended to show every single slide. I picked up the remote again. Exhibit A. I announced like a prosecutor in a courtroom. The so-called business trip. I clicked the button. The slide changed. The image on the screen was grainy but undeniable. It was a surveillance photo taken from a ceiling camera. It showed Kyle sitting at a blackjack table. He looked disheveled, sweaty, and desperate. He had a stack of chips in front of him, but he was pushing them all into the center of the table. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was dated 3 weeks ago. "This is where the home equity loan went," I explained to the room. "Kyle told you he was investing in crypto. He told you he was building a portfolio. In reality, he was at the Harrah's Casino in Cherokee, North Carolina, playing high-stakes blackjack. He lost $40,000 in one night." I clicked again. Another photo. This one showed Kyle pawning a watch. My father's gold watch. The one Beatrice had sworn was in a safety deposit box. "He sold Dad's watch for $2,000 to buy back in," I said. "He lost that in 20 minutes. Beatrice let out a low moan, swaying on her feet. "No," she whispered. "He told me he was meeting with angel investors. He said the watch was being cleaned." "He lied, Mother," I said simply. I clicked the remote again. Exhibit B, the pregnancy. The screen changed to a document that looked like a medical chart, but it was blank. Next to it was a report from a private investigator detailing the surveillance of Chantel for the past 6 months. "Chantel claims she is 6 months pregnant," I said, looking at my sister, who was now huddled in her chair, wrapping her arms around her fake belly. "She claims she needs organic food and a special mattress. But here is the report from every OB/GYN clinic in Atlanta. There is no file for a Chantel Vance, no ultrasounds, no blood work." I clicked the button again. A video played. It was taken with a long-range lens. It showed Chantel standing outside a bar, smoking a cigarette and drinking from a flask. The date stamp was 4 days ago, right here in Chicago. "Pregnant women do not smoke menthols, Chantel," I said. "And they certainly do not drink vodka in alleyways. There is no baby. There never was. You used a pillow and a lie to get sympathy. You used a non-existent child to invade my home." Uncle Marcus stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at the screen and then at Chantel. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger. "You lied about a child. You lied to God about a baby." Chantel did not answer. She just put her head on the table and sobbed, but the sound was muffled by the lie she was literally wearing. And finally I said, pressing the button one last time, "Exhibit C, the reason you are really here." The screen filled with a mugshot. It was Kyle. He looked younger in the photo, but it was definitely him. Below the face were the charges: wire fraud, grand larceny, Ponzi scheme. "This is a warrant from the state of Georgia," I said. "Kyle is not just a bad gambler. He is a fugitive. He ran a fake investment circle 2 years ago, stealing retirement funds from elderly church members in Macon. He has been dodging the court summons. That is why he wanted to come to Chicago. That is why he wanted to stay in my house. I am not a sister to him. I am a hideout." I turned to Pastor Johnson. "You asked me to honor my family. Pastor, I am honoring the truth. This man is a criminal. My sister is an accomplice. And my mother is the enabler who sold our family home to fund their delusions." I put the remote down on the table. The click of plastic on wood sounded like a gavel banging. The evidence is conclusive, I said. The audit is complete. The room felt small. The air felt thin, as if the weight of the truth had sucked all the oxygen out of the penthouse. For a moment, no one moved. The images on the screen loomed over us, a glowing testament to the rot that had been festering in my family for years. Pastor Johnson was the first to move. He stood up slowly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked at Beatrice, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. "Beatrice," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You called me here to bless a testimony, but the only testimony I see here is one of greed and deception. You have used the Lord's name to cover up sin." He turned to me. "Simone, I owe you an apology. I judged you for being distant. Now I see that distance was wisdom. God does not dwell in the house of liars." He picked up his Bible and walked toward the door. He did not look back. Aunt Sarah followed him. She grabbed her purse, clutching it tight to her chest, as if she was afraid Kyle might try to steal it too. She stopped in front of Chantel. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," she hissed, "lying about a baby." "That is a curse, Chantel. You brought a curse on yourself." Uncle Marcus just shook his head, looking at Kyle, who was still pinned against the wall. He spat on the floor near Kyle's feet, a gesture of pure disrespect. Then he walked out, slamming the heavy front door behind him. The guests were gone. The jury had left. The verdict was guilty. Chantel finally broke. The pressure was too much. She stood up, tearing at the caftan dress. She reached under the fabric and pulled. A large foam pad wrapped in bandages came loose. She threw it on the floor. It bounced once, a pathetic, hollow sound. There she screamed, her face blotchy and wet with tears. "Are you happy now, Simone? You exposed us. You stripped us naked. Are you happy? Yes, there is no baby. Yes, we are broke. Yes, we lost the house. We have nothing. Are you satisfied?" She collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball next to the foam belly. It was a grotesque tableau. My sister, the golden child, reduced to a weeping mess on my dining room floor, surrounded by the debris of her own lies. Beatrice did not move. She sat at the table, staring at the empty chair where the pastor had sat. She looked broken. The facade of the pious matriarch had crumbled, leaving behind a frightened old woman who had bet everything on the wrong horse. I looked at them. I looked at the wreckage of my dinner party. I felt a strange sense of hollowness. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. It was the feeling of finally lancing a boil that had been poisoning my blood for decades. "I am not happy, Chantel," I said, my voice quiet, but filling the empty room. "I am not satisfied. I am just finished. I am finished being the bank. I am finished being the backup plan. And I am finished being the daughter you only remember when you need a check." I signaled to David, the security guard. "Let him go," I said, pointing to Kyle. David released Kyle's arm. Kyle slumped forward, rubbing his shoulder. He did not look at me. He stared at the floor, defeated. "Get your things," I said. "You have 10 minutes. Anything left behind goes in the trash. And Kyle, if you ever try to contact me again, if you ever try to use my name for one of your scams, I will send that file to the FBI." I turned my back on them and walked toward the balcony. I needed fresh air. I needed to breathe. Behind me, I heard the shuffling of feet and the sound of sobbing. They were leaving. My life was finally my own. The sound of sirens cut through the heavy silence of the penthouse like a knife. It started as a distant wail rising from the streets of Chicago 45 floors below, but within seconds, it grew into a deafening crescendo. Blue and red lights began to flash against the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the room in the violent colors of emergency. Kyle froze. He was halfway to the guest room to retrieve his stolen luggage, but the sound paralyzed him. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and for the first time I saw the true face of the man who had destroyed my family. It was not the face of a visionary or a leader. It was the face of a coward who knew his time had run out. "I called them 10 minutes ago," I said, my voice calm and devoid of pity. I figured since you like making grand entrances, you would appreciate a grand exit. Kyle bolted. He did not run toward the door to face his fate like a man. He ran toward the kitchen, scanning the room for a back exit that did not exist. My security guard David stepped into his path. His arms crossed his face, impassive. There was nowhere to run. The elevator chimed. It was a cheerful sound that stood in stark contrast to the doom waiting inside. The doors slid open and 3 uniformed officers stepped into my foyer. They did not need to ask who the suspect was. Kyle was the only one sweating in an ill-fitting suit that smelled of fear and cheap champagne. Kyle Jenkins, one of the officers, announced, walking straight toward him. "We have a warrant for your arrest from the state of Georgia. Fraud, larceny, flight to avoid prosecution. Put your hands behind your back." Kyle started to whimper. It was a pathetic, high-pitched sound. Wait, you do not understand. This is a misunderstanding. My sister-in-law is crazy. She is trying to frame me. I am a businessman." The officer spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed off the marble floors. It was a sound of finality, a sound of justice. I watched as the metal bit into the fabric of my father's suit jacket. I felt a strange sense of vindication. My father had been a man of law and order, a man of integrity. It was fitting that his suit was the last thing to touch Kyle before he was stripped of his freedom. "Please, Beatrice, do something," Kyle screamed as they began to drag him toward the elevator. "Do not let them take me. I am the father of your grandchild." I looked at Chantel. She was still on the floor staring at the wall, completely catatonic. She did not even look up as her husband was hauled away. She knew the game was over. The officers pushed Kyle into the elevator. He tried to kick the doors, but they closed, cutting off his screams. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, but it was clean. The parasite had been removed. Beatrice stood by the window, her hands pressed against the glass, as if she could stop the police car from driving away just by willing it. She watched the lights fade into the Chicago traffic, and then she turned to me. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and despair. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate clawing need for survival. She walked toward me, her hands outstretched, trembling. "Simone," she choked out. "You have to help him. You have to call a lawyer. He is family. He made mistakes, but he is family. And what about us? What about me and Chantel? We have nowhere to go, Simone. They took the house. We are on the street." She grabbed my hand, clutching it with a strength born of panic. "You cannot do this to your mother. I raised you. I prayed for you. You have so much money, Simone. You have this big empty house. Just let us stay. Just for a month. Just until we figure this out. We will sleep on the floor. We will do anything. Please, baby, do not be cruel." I looked at her hands gripping mine. Hands that had slapped me when I was a child for speaking my mind. Hands that had signed away my father's legacy to fund a con artist. I pulled my hand away slowly but firmly, wiping it on my pants. "I am not being cruel, Mother," I said. "I am being a risk analyst, and you are a liability I can no longer afford to carry." Beatrice began to weep loud, hacking sobs. "We lost the house," she wailed. "My home, your father's home. It is gone, Simone. A bank in Delaware owns it now. Do you know what that feels like? To lose your history." I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up a file I had saved for the very end. It was a thin blue folder. I held it out to her. "The bank in Delaware does not own it anymore," I said. Beatrice stopped crying. She looked at the folder. She looked at me, hope flaring in her eyes like a dying ember. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "I mean I bought the debt," I said, my voice flat. "When I found out the house was foreclosed, I contacted the holding company. I purchased the lien. I paid off the arrears and the penalties. The deed was transferred this morning." Beatrice let out a cry of joy. She fell to her knees, raising her hands to the ceiling. "Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Simone. I knew it. I knew you would save us. You bought the house back. We can go home. We can go back to Atlanta. Oh, bless you, child. I will pay you back, I swear. We will start over. She tried to grab my legs to hug me, but I stepped back. Stand up, mother, I commanded. She scrambled to her feet, smiling through her tears. When can we leave? I will pack the bags right now. We can drive back tomorrow. I looked her dead in the eye. You are not going back, I said. The smile faltered. What? I bought the house, mother, but I did not buy it for you. You lost the right to live there the day you signed a second mortgage to fund a gambler. You disrespected Dad's memory. You put his legacy on a roulette table. You do not get to sleep in his bed anymore. Beatrice looked confused, her mind unable to process the rejection. But it is our house. It is the family home. Not anymore, I said. I am liquidating it. Liquidating. She repeated the word, tasting like poison. I have already arranged the sale, I continued. I am selling the property to a non-profit organization in Atlanta. It is called the Sarah House. It is a transitional shelter for women and children escaping domestic abuse and financial fraud. I watched the realization hit her. It was a physical blow. She staggered back, clutching her chest. You are giving my house to strangers, she gasped. I am giving the house to people who actually need it, I corrected her. People who have been victimized, not people who create victims. The sale proceeds will be donated entirely to the charity. I am not keeping a dime. And neither are you. You cannot do this, she screamed, her anger returning in a flash. That is my inheritance. That is my property. It was your property, I said. And you gambled it away. Now it is my asset, and I am choosing to invest it in the community. I am choosing to turn your failure into someone else's fresh start. That is what actual Black excellence looks like, mother. It is not about hoarding wealth or showing off at dinner parties. It is about lifting people up. I turned to David. Get their bags, I said. Put them in the hallway. Beatrice lunged at me, but she was weak and broken. You are the devil, she spat. I have no daughter, I nodded. You are right. You do not have a daughter. You have a creditor, and your account is closed. David and the other guard gathered the 6 suitcases. They marched Chantel and Beatrice toward the door. Chantel was still weeping softly, clutching her empty stomach. Beatrice was cursing, muttering biblical plagues under her breath. They reached the threshold of the penthouse. Beatrice turned back one last time. Where will we go? She asked, her voice small and terrified. It is snowing, Simone. Where will we sleep? I looked at them standing in the hallway, the golden child and the matriarch reduced to vagrants by their own greed. I hear there is a shelter on 4th Street, I said. If you hurry, you might get a bed. I stepped forward and grabbed the heavy handle of the door. Goodbye, Mother. I slammed the door. The sound echoed through the apartment, a final thunderclap that signaled the end of the storm. I engaged the deadbolt. Click. I engaged the secondary lock. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I listened. I heard Beatrice pounding on the other side for a minute, screaming my name. Then I heard the elevator ding. Then silence. I pushed myself away from the door and turned around to face my apartment. It was a mess. There was broken glass on the floor. There was a spilled vase. There were red envelopes scattered on the table, but the air felt different. It felt light. I walked over to the kitchen. I picked up the bottle of wine Kyle had opened. I poured the rest of it down the sink. I did not want to drink his leftovers. I opened a new bottle, a vintage Cabernet I had been saving for a special occasion. This was a special occasion. I poured a glass and walked out onto the balcony. The cold Chicago wind hit my face, stinging my skin, making me feel alive. I looked out at the city lights glittering like diamonds against the velvet darkness. I looked south toward where Atlanta would be miles and miles away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email notification. The transfer of the deed to the Sarah house was complete. My childhood home was gone, but it was going to save lives. My father would have been proud. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like grapes and oak and freedom. I was alone. No family, no safety net, just me and the skyline. And for the first time in 35 years, I realized that being alone did not mean being lonely. It meant being free. I raised my glass to the empty sky. To the bill, I whispered, paid in full. If you have ever had to buy your own freedom from the people who were supposed to love you for free, hit the like button. If you have ever had to choose your sanity over your bloodline, subscribe to the channel. My name is Simone Vance, and this was the most expensive dinner of my life. But it was worth every penny. Simone's journey teaches us a powerful truth. Sharing DNA does not give anyone the license to destroy your peace or drain your hard-earned success. We often fear that setting boundaries makes us the villain, but as Simone proved, it is actually the ultimate act of self-preservation. You cannot save people who are determined to drown, especially when they view you only as a life raft. True family is built on mutual respect, not manipulation. Walking away isn't about hate, it is about loving yourself enough to stop paying for their mistakes. Your peace is the one luxury you must defend at all costs. If this story inspired you to know your worth and stand your ground, please hit the like button, subscribe for more stories of resilience, and share this video with anyone who needs the courage to send their own bill.